In 1953, this country had almost nothing left. No factories worth mentioning, no universities producing engineers, no electricity in most rural homes. Its capital city was a field of ash and rubble. Economists at the time didn't just call it poor, they called it a lost cause, a nation with no path to development, ranked below Ethiopia and Sudan in income per person. Today, that same country builds the chips inside your phone, the screen you're watching this video on, and possibly the car in your driveway. Its companies dominate global memory chip production. Its pop culture reaches more people than Hollywood in some markets. Its capital is one of the most technologically advanced cities on Earth. How does a country go from the ashes of war to global tech superpower in one human lifetime? And why did almost every economic model at the time say it was impossible? This is the story of South Korea. And by the end, you'll understand a twist in this story that most people, even Koreans themselves, rarely talk about. Let's get into it. To understand the miracle, you first need to understand the disaster. When the Korean War ended in 1953, the peninsula had already been devastated by 35 years of brutal Japanese colonial rule, followed by 3 years of war that flattened nearly every major city. Seoul changed hands 4 times. Millions were dead or displaced. South Korea had virtually no natural resources to speak of, no oil, limited minerals, and a mountainous landscape covering 70% of the land, leaving little room for agriculture. For years, the country survived almost entirely on foreign aid, mostly from the United States. Per capita income hovered around $67 a year, lower than most of sub-Saharan Africa. There was no industrial base. There was no meaningful export sector. If you had asked any economist in 1955 to bet on which Asian nation would become a technological powerhouse, South Korea would not have made the list. The turning point came in 1961, when General Park Chung-hee seized power in a military coup, whatever the moral complexities of his rule, and they were significant, marked by authoritarian repression. Park made one strategic decision that reshaped the entire nation. He treated economic development as a matter of national survival, not gradual policy. Park's government picked a handful of family-run conglomerates, companies like Samsung, Hyundai, and LG, and funneled cheap loans, tax breaks, and government contracts directly to them in exchange. These companies had to hit aggressive export targets, fail, and the support disappeared. This wasn't free market capitalism. It was closer to a state-directed sprint where the government picked winners and demanded results in return. These conglomerates became known as chaebols, and they didn't start in technology. Samsung began by trading dried fish, noodles, and sugar. Hyundai started in construction, but the government pushed them relentlessly up the value chain, from textiles to steel to shipbuilding to electronics, forcing companies to master increasingly sophisticated manufacturing with each decade. Take steel. In the late 1960s, South Korea had no meaningful steel industry and almost no capital to build one. The government pushed forward anyway, founding the state-backed steelmaker POSCO on land that had recently been a battlefield. Within a generation, POSCO grew into one of the most efficient steel producers on the planet, supplying the raw material that Hyundai's shipyards and, later, Korea's car makers would need to compete internationally. By the 1970s, South Korean shipyards were winning contracts against far more established competitors in Japan and Europe, often by promising faster delivery and lower costs than anyone believed possible from a country that had barely industrialized a decade earlier. At the same time, Park's government made a bet that would define the next 50 years: education. Even while the country remained desperately poor, spending on schooling was treated as untouchable. Korean parents, drawing on a Confucian cultural emphasis on academic achievement, poured whatever savings they had into their children's education. By the 1980s, South Korea had one of the most literate, highly educated workforces in the developing world, engineers and technicians ready to build an industrial base almost from nothing. This obsession with education wasn't gentle encouragement. It was closer to a national arms race. Students studied late into the night, often attending private after-school academies known as Hagwons on top of a full day of regular classes. College entrance exams became so important that on test day, flights were rerouted to avoid noise near exam halls. An entire country adjusted its schedule around students, taking the single test that could define their career. It was an intense, often brutal system, but it produced exactly what heavy industry and, later, the tech sector needed: a deep, reliable pipeline of disciplined engineers, scientists, and skilled workers. Then came the gamble that changed everything. In 1983, Samsung's founder Lee Byung-chul announced the company would enter the semiconductor business, despite having no experience in the field. Despite Japan and the United States already dominating global chip production, and despite many of his own executives believing it was financial suicide, Samsung was hemorrhaging money on the project for years. But Lee understood something crucial. Memory chips follow a brutal boom and bust cycle. When prices crash and rivals pull back investment, whoever keeps building factories through the downturn ends up dominating the next boom. Samsung bet everything on outlasting its competitors during the painful periods. It worked. By the mid-1990s, Samsung had become a major player in drawn memory chips. Today, along with SK Hynix, South Korea controls the overwhelming majority of the world's memory chip production. The components inside nearly every smartphone, laptop, and data center on the planet. What happened next revealed something about the national character that had built this country in the first place. Ordinary citizens lined up outside banks to donate their personal gold, wedding rings, jewelry, family heirlooms, melting down over 200 tons of gold to help repay the national debt. The crisis forced painful reforms. Chaebols were made more transparent. Weaker companies were allowed to fail instead of being propped up indefinitely. And the economy became leaner and more competitive. Within just a few years, South Korea had not only recovered, it emerged stronger, better positioned for the digital age that was about to begin. From the wreckage of the crisis came a new wave of innovation. South Korea became a testing ground for mobile technology, home broadband, and eventually smartphones. Samsung's Galaxy line rose to challenge Apple globally. LG pushed forward in displays and appliances. Meanwhile, something unexpected happened alongside the hardware. Korean culture itself became an export. K-pop, Korean dramas, and Korean cinema spread worldwide, creating a kind of cultural soft power that fed back into demand for Korean electronics, Korean beauty products, and Korean brands more broadly. Technology and culture reinforce each other in a way few countries have managed. What do you think? Can South Korea solve its demographic crisis? Or is this the beginning of its decline? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Atlas Aura for more stories on geography, economy, history, and the forces shaping our future.